Welcome to the Be Bold for Jesus podcast. We go to those on the front lines nationwide, bringing you special guests and topics facing Christians in today's world. We discuss matters of family, work, communities, and our nation, covering how to overcome life's challenges and embrace being bold for Jesus in our walk, God's Word, His promises, and how to share our faith boldly with others. Now let's get bold.
Welcome to the Be Bold for Jesus podcast. I am your host, Keith Atneson, and today we have a special guest with us, Tom Walther, who is a principal chair with C12. Tom, welcome.
Welcome. I'm glad to be here.
Great, good to have you. I would love to get a little bit more of a description of C12 for our listeners. But as well, if you could just take some time to share a little bit about your journey and the path that the Lord's had you on, and including to the work that you're doing now with C12, that would be awesome.
Yeah, so C12 is an organization of Christian CEOs, presidents, business owners that meet together for a monthly time where we gather to talk about business. So C12's mission is to equip those leaders to build great businesses for a greater purpose. And so we're all about building a good business and a very productive, but also seeing their business as a ministry. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. I kind of began my journey as a young guy in leadership, and ultimately rose to the president and CEO of a wholesale distribution company that was based in Central Illinois, and was there for 18 years. And that journey kind of came to an end. We had been acquired by a much larger organization about 8 years earlier. And their desire was to kind of suck us into their organization, but God had other plans, and He allowed me the opportunity to lead that business for the next 8 years, and did so. And until at such time it came to a point where they finally got their wish and they were able to absorb us into their organization. But along the way, there are a lot of God stories and just ways of how He's led in my life, even coming to become the president. There was just a quick story about there was someone else originally planned to take over the business when that company acquired us. And that just kind of fell by the wayside, and the opportunity opened up for me to take on that leadership role. I was a vice president of sales and marketing at the time, and God just opened doors and closed some others for some other people, and gave me that opportunity to do that. And then that period ended, and we were led to go to Wisconsin, and I was got into an entirely different industry. And it was in engineering, specifically process control automation. And we did process control system implementation for the food industry, food manufacturing companies. And we did that through providing the ability to redesign their production processes and bring in automated type controls and develop programs and so forth. So you essentially could run a plant from your iPad in the lunchroom, was the technology you finally got to. And I was with that company for 21 years. And and in that role, I first started out as a general manager of a computer division. That company was also building their own servers and computers and laptops and that type of thing. And I joined that company as a general manager for that. Within about a year and a half, I could see the writing on the wall and felt like we needed to make a major shift in our market plan or business plan, and really questioned whether the company had the wherewithal to make the shift. We had a lot of entrenched people and ideas of how things should be done, and that was about the days of when Dell was starting to come on the scene, Dell computers. And I knew our business model was going to have to shift, or we should get out of it. And we chose to get out of it. And I ended up selling it to a company that is part of the story a little bit later down the road. And when I sold that, I sold my job with it because once that was gone, there really wasn't a need for somebody to do what I was doing. But again, God had some different ideas, and I ended up staying with the original company and ultimately taking over as president and CEO of that organization. Was there for 21 years, and along the way had joined a CEO peer group and really enjoyed the experience. It was with the University of Wisconsin at the time, and it kind of ran its course, and I was looking for something else. And it was about ready to join another CEO peer group that was more of a large international group, very well known. And just before I pulled the trigger, or was about to pull the trigger to join that, I came across a little LinkedIn posting from the guy I had sold that computer division to 15 years earlier. And here I saw a listing showing that he was selling his part of the business to his partner, and he was going to start something called C12 in Wisconsin. And I wondered, what in the world is that, and what's he doing? I had been keep in touch with him over the years, and found out a little bit more about what C12 was, and said, "Wow! I mean, I'm looking for a CEO peer group anyway, but to have one that's got some biblical foundation and background to it, that was even better." And that was so I called him up and joined, and was a part of that organization for a couple of years as a member. And then we had sold our company to our employees through an ESOP, employee stock ownership program. And I stayed on for another 4 years after that, and eventually hired a successor. And once he got established and on board, then I ended up leaving the company and was looking for what the next chapter in life was about to be, and got a call from that C12 chair, who had invited me to join him and be a part of a new group opening up in Madison, Wisconsin. And so I did, and we were a part of that, got that started and going, and really was enjoying that. And was we were living about 90 miles north of Madison at the time. And I was starting to make that drive 2, 3, 4 times a week. And my wife and I were really considering whether or not we should start to think about moving there. And so we were starting to explore it, but just didn't have a level of comfort or peace. And I guess we both did, went to a training that C12 had offered for all of our national chairs to come together, and it was in Dallas.
And were you on staff at this point, or this was part of your journey of exploring C12?
This was part of my, I was a part of the staff, so to speak. I was an associate chair working for this individual who had his own franchise.
I see.
So I was a part of his team, and we were all together in Dallas, and part of for some training. And part of our training involved Richard Blackaby and the Experiencing God series, and
sure, yeah,
through that, and in that process, there was a little exercise where 2 or 3 of us were supposed to get together, kind of share a challenge, and the other 2 would coach them on it. And I raised the question, hey, give me some godly counsel on thinking about moving to Madison, and what pros and cons I should consider. And I'm looking for some feedback. And one of the tools that Richard had shared with us was, you might be in a conversation with a client or a coaching situation, and you may need to just hit the pause button and just spend some time in prayer. And we got about 5 minutes into my discussion, and the other leader said, yeah, let's do that. Let's just hit the pause button and spend some time in prayer and ask God for direction. And while he started praying, I just had a sense, it's hard to describe, but just had a real sense of God speaking to me and saying, I'm not giving you the green light to Madison because I want you to move to Washington. And I was like beside myself thinking, Washington? I didn't come down to Dallas and think about moving out to that side of the country. And my mind
and not even specifically the Puget Sound.
No, right.
And either, right? It was a little bit more rural in Eastern Washington.
Exactly. And my mind was just racing, and this guy was still praying. And finally, I got to kind of hold of myself a little bit. And I thought, well, God, if you're speaking me to move to Washington, you ought to be talking to my wife about this time as well. She's not here in this session, but she's here at the conference. And I thought, yeah, let's see if God's been speaking to her. And then I thought, well, that doesn't make any sense. I'm doing this thing up in C12 in Wisconsin, and I really feel called to do that, but I have no idea what's going on out there, if there's anything I can do or come alongside anybody. And then it dawned on me that the CEO of the company was here at this meeting, and that I could have a conversation with him. And so about that time, the guy finished praying, and he looks up at me and he says, well, did you sense any direction from God? And I was just stunned. I could hardly speak. And I said, well, I'm not sure. And I kind of left it at that. And the next morning I sat down with my wife, and I just shared with her the same story, and she didn't say anything for, I don't know, it seemed like forever, but she finally looked up and looked me in the eyes and said, let's do it. And I said, what? And she said, let's do it. And both of us started spewing out all these reasons why this would be the dumbest idea for us to do. And pick up lock, stock, and barrel at our age. We were already past 65, and both of us about the same time had this peace come over us. Well, if God's behind this, we don't have to worry about any of these details. He'll take care of them all. And we didn't know a lot of details, and we didn't know when this was going to happen, or if this was
a lot more questions than answers.
3 weeks, 3 months, 3 years. I had no idea. A lot more questions than answers. Yeah. And anyway, we that afternoon I sat down with the CEO, and I said, I'm just going to share what happened yesterday. And he looked at me and he question mark. He says, Spokane? And I said, well, yeah, actually Spokane is a part of the area that I'm thinking about. And he laughed and he says, well, Tom, all I can tell you is that there's nothing from C12's perspective that would keep you from doing that. And I said, why? What do we got going on out there? And he goes, well, that's what I'm trying to tell you. Nothing. He said, they have no idea who we are.
Absolutely a need for marketplace ministry in this region. Yeah.
Exactly. And so that began the journey, and that began the process of coming out to Eastern Washington. We settled in the Tri-Cities. As it turned out, my son had moved there from Phoenix, and along with his family. And so for the first time, we were actually able to be close to one of our kids and their grandkids, and that worked out. And then that began the journey of starting to create a group, and we got one form that meets up in Spokane now, and there's a full 12 members in that group, and it's really starting to thrive. And Lee Arnold, who's a part of obviously putting Be Bold for Jesus together, is a part of that group, and as a result of that, I've been helping to sponsor the event for the last several years as well.
Join us October 13th through the 15th at the Spokane Convention Center for the Be Bold for Jesus Conference, featuring Greg Laurie of Jesus Revolution, Jeff Foxworthy, the funniest man you'll ever meet, Lee Strobel, author of A Case for Christ, Ken Ham of the Ark Encounter and Creation Museum, recording artist Danny Goki, and founding member of Real Life Ministries, Pastor Jim Putman. You will be equipped to live out your faith in boldness and connect with like-minded believers who share your passion for Christ. Don't miss this life-changing event. Register now at bb4j.com.
I think folks may not realize that for leaders, as they progress in leadership, they often can find themselves isolated.
Yes.
In that arena of decision making. What are some of the challenges that you've seen in working both in leadership yourself and working with other leaders, of that potential of being isolated and having to make a lot of decisions potentially without much support?
Well, that actually is something very near and dear to me. I remember sitting at my desk, running this engineering organization, and having some situations come up that I was really challenged with. I wasn't sure which way to go. And when they talk about feeling lonely at the top, it's true, because some of your critical issues that you're dealing with are the people that are surrounding you, and they're not necessarily the ones that you want to ask about them on how you're going to deal with something or solve with something. So that feeling of being lonely at the top is very real, and anybody who's running a company knows what that's like. And or waking up in the middle of the night and wondering how payroll is going to get met in the next week, or those kinds of issues. And what C12 does is bring together people who understand exactly what it feels like to sit in that seat, and to be able to come together and share with each other and challenge each other some of the things that we're doing and saying. And the additional part that C12 brings to it is that business as a ministry component. And one of the questions I was asked at one time was, have you ever considered your business a ministry? And I had to admit that not really, that, I thought I brought my Christian values to the table, but I didn't really think of it much beyond that. And they said, well, think about the number of people that you influence. Think about the number of employees you have. You certainly influence them. And think about the number of family members that are connected to them that you have an indirect influence over at the very least. And think about the number of clients you have, and think about the number of suppliers, and think about the other industry contacts, and add up that number. And your sphere of influence is probably greater than the average pastor has on any given Sunday.
Absolutely. Yeah.
What are you doing to be intentional with that? And that got me thinking, and I thought, boy, I've never thought that way about it. And even if I did, I'm not sure what I would do next. And well, join C12 and we'll help you on that journey. And so helping company leaders and owners to see their business as a ministry opportunity is a big part of what we talk about at C12, as well as the critical issues in revenue generation and operations and financial management, organizational development are all topics that we get into as well.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the analogies that I've picked up along the way that I enjoy sharing is, for me as a human being, there's a rule of the game that I need to pump blood.
Yeah.
If my heart's not pumping blood, I'm done. At the same time, I do not think God put me on the face of the planet to just pump blood. I've got a greater calling and purpose that he's designed for me. And Ephesians 2:10 would say too, that there's good works prepared in advance. And so for business, I think it's a very similar analogy in that the profit's blood flow. Got to have profit or you're done. But there's a greater purpose than just generating the profit.
Yeah, yes, exactly. Our little tagline saying is no margin, no mission. Now, you've got to have something to work with as well. And being so we really strive for excellence in business, but it's also understanding what are you doing that for, and what are you going to do with that excellence, and the opportunity to spill off into so many different people's lives. So one of the exercises that I have each of our members do is to calculate that sphere of influence. Think about the number of people that what you do, what you say, the policies that you have, how that spills off into other people's lives. And each of them, calculate that out. And then we kind of put that on their little tent card, for the meetings. And then I take the cumulative number of that group and say, hey, here's what our group is influencing right now. And we're almost at 4 million people around.
That is incredible.
12 that are, the amount of influence that we have with what we say, do. And, that has to do with our marketing and advertising. But it also has to do with the culture that we're developing in our companies that spill off into others. I love sharing a story about one of my peers in Wisconsin who really took what C12 is doing and really worked in investing in his employees. And it did start spilling off into their families. And then from their families, it did start spilling off into their community. And their community was being affected by this one company. And
can you unpack that a little bit? What did that actually look like as they were beginning to get their arms around this idea that we need to be stewards, not just of the financial side of it, but stewards of the impact? Can you unpack a little bit of what that?
Well, it essentially comes down to for caring for other people and sharing the love of Jesus and helping them see that. And sometimes it's through, prayer times and prayer groups or Bible studies or just other activities out in the community. We have, each company kind of finds its own way a little bit in terms of, how it lives out the gospel in not only their company, but into the community. But in his case, it spread into different activities they had for, community action times where the employees were given time to be able to volunteer and into that. And, and as as they would do that, it would, there'd always be the inevitable question of, what are you guys doing out here? And they'd have a chance to share what Jesus is doing in their lives and how that's spilling over into other people. But interesting enough, I was in Atlanta at one of our executive conferences, and the guy next to me happened to be from Denver. And my friend, who was the peer in the central Wisconsin, was speaking at that time because his business had just exploded. And God had just, blessed them immensely. And somebody in their industry had contacted him and said, would you come and speak to our, industry forum, because your company is just moving and grooving and doing great things? And he said, well, I'd love to come and share what God is doing in our company. And the guy said, well, God, what's he got to do with it? And he said, well, you invite me to speak and I'll tell you. And they did. And he was sharing what was happening and what was going on in their organization. And this guy next to me said, I'm sitting here at this industry convention, hearing this guy talking about what's going on. And he said, I don't know what he's drinking, but I got to get me some of that Kool-Aid. And he found out he was a part of C12. And so this guy ends up joining from Atlanta in the industry. And his comment to me was, not only has this gentleman changed his company and their families and their community, but he's changing our industry. And I'm a living testament of that.
Madison, founder of Freedom Summit Consulting. If you are a small business owner, you may find yourself working long days with the challenges of managing employees and making decisions with increasing economic uncertainty. We help owners identify opportunities to increase business value, develop the next generation of leaders, and design a plan for the eventual sale of their business that meets their long-term goals. Please visit freedomsummitconsulting.com or call 208-508-2416 to schedule a complimentary consultation.
There's an energy that I'm picking up too, that I think somebody that's maybe not as familiar with this, however you want to frame it, double bottom line or this missional stewardship impact, it might look like it's just a net cost, like it's another line item in a sense of overhead. But in reality, I think there's a pragmatic, positive impact it can have in a business when we start thinking about employee engagement and employee attrition. I mean, what are some of the impacts that you see for businesses? There's the kingdom side, which has a return that we can't fully grasp, but it is enormous. But there's also additional impact economically for businesses to engage and be more missional.
Yeah, absolutely. We started our group right in the middle of COVID. And I can tell you that the members that were a part of that, our first initial group, first initial members we were all dealing with the same thing of what's the impact going to be. And each one of them I would attest to how God just blessed them and just had them in his hand during that whole time. And they had better years than they'd ever had before. Was it all, being a part of C12 or not, that I wouldn't go as far as to say, other than, spending and putting your confidence in the Lord and letting him direct and act has a phenomenal return. But it has an impact in companies' cultures. We start seeing that shift, that they maybe start tweaking what some of their values are and how they approach it. Some are very bold and, hey, we're a biblically based organization and blah, 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 and that causes us to do this, and this. Others are maybe a little bit more subdued, from that standpoint. But this whole idea of having a cultural impact really stands out. And because of that, it's the eternal consequences are just amazing. And I think that's probably one of the biggest takeaways that people have is not only do I feel better equipped to run my company even better, I'm doing it for reasons that I had never even thought possible before. And now when I see other people's lives being changed, and we hear of, somebody coming to know the Lord as a result of an activity that happened at work, or an opportunity to put, maybe bring in chaplains or that type of thing. And, life happens We have a great story of a company, wasn't necessarily in our area, but a landscaping company, nothing super fancy, but probably had 40 or so employees. And one of the employees was killed on the way into work on his motorcycle. And it was devastating to the company. And as you can imagine, but he had already brought a chaplain group as to be a part of the group and part of the company already. So he was kind of embedded in the DNA, and he pulled the guys together and said, hey, let's just spend some time to, digress or to reflect and just to help be supportive to each other, because that was stunning. And as a result of that opportunity, he was able to share the gospel and and the impact of that. And I think 3 or 4 people raised their hand and said that they wanted to accept Jesus. And a couple of days later, they were kind of regrouping, still processing the death and the funeral and all. And the chaplain said, why don't we just have a baptism right here? And they kind of all together like, what? And he said, yeah, we got a tank of water that we use in the landscaping business, and I'll fill it up. and they did. They actually had a baptism with those 3. And as a result of that, 4 more people came to know the Lord. And the mother of that employee was there, part of it, and saying, I never would have imagined that my son's death would have ever had anything but sorrow connected to it. But she said, I'm seeing what God is doing as a result of that and what's happening in other people's lives. And in a unbelievable way, I am praising him for seeing what he's doing and impacting other people's lives for eternity. And that just doesn't happen in the normal company.
It's a really powerful story. That's amazing. Well, and I think a lot of churches and pastors, they don't necessarily grasp this potential that you had mentioned, like within your group of 12, that there's potentially 4 million individuals that are getting impacted. And I think a lot of times pastors and churches can fall into kind of a traditional view of the Western church, that we have this ministry or this program, and this is how you can plug into the ministries of this church, without really realizing that the main mission field for folks is in their workplace or in their business. So for somebody who is saying, I'd like to engage in this journey of being a better steward of the influence that they have, and they're a business owner, what does the experience look like to join C12? And what does that look like in the structure and commitments and outcomes? So
for members, we what I do encourage people to be a part of C12. There is somewhat of an investment threshold that is kind of an ideal target. I'll probably put it that way. So C12 would typically say that you should be at least at 2 million in revenue and 10 employees, just because we're going to take you out of your operation for a full day and a lot of per month, and a lot of organizations just wouldn't be able to stand have the ability to have the owner or the president out for a full day like that. So you have to have a little bit of enough infrastructure. Plus, the kinds of things that we talk about are a little bit more geared for companies that have got a little infrastructure. So I typically, in our group, we're not across the board, but we kind of steer towards companies that are 40 plus employees and in that neighborhood, and just because there's enough infrastructure to take advantage of some of the things we have. Ours there is an investment, a monthly cost, and for us, our group right now is at $1,300 a month. And in order to be able to see the return on investment, because that's really what it is, it's investing in yourself and in your organization. You've got to have a little bit of substance there to be able to really generate the multitudes of returns that companies get are usually 10 plus in that in return. But the commitment is for spend 1 day a month for a full day, and then we get into your business instead of working in it. We're working on it.
Which is something a lot of leaders struggle to make the time for.
Exactly.
Fighting fires and wrestling alligators.
Exactly.
day by day instead of really getting above the fray and saying, where are we headed with this?
Yeah, above the fray. And so we get a lot into the strategic planning process at different parts of the year. In the beginning of the year, we typically are talking about organizational development issues and kind of getting the team ready. In the next 4 months of the year, we're typically talking about operational issues and things that can improve operations. And then in the last 4 months or trimester of the year, we're starting to get into that planning mode again for the next year. Is kind of our cadence, but probably one of the things that so I guess I'll back up a little bit and say, a typical day for us is we spend a little bit of time in a devotional that kind of sets the stage for the topics that we're going to be talking about that day. Then we get into a business segment and then a ministry segment of application, often times for that. And one good example was we were talking about employee development and personnel issues, HR issues, and we got into the ministry segment on employee performance reviews, which, favorite topic for most every manager.
Oh yeah, all managers and employees just love when it comes time for that performance review, don't they?
But this particular ministry application was how to take the performance review and help the employee be able to see their worth from God's perspective, and helping to steer the conversation to what has God made you for? And are we doing a good job of positioning you to take advantage for you to really bloom and flourish in this environment? And it puts such a different perspective on a performance review type approach that I know all of the members came away from that meeting going, I've got to have a conversation with my HR people. We're not taking, we're not doing it this way. And it was really a neat way of taking a ministry principle and applying it right into a business application. And then, of course, one of the most revered times of the day is what we call an open forum time, where you can bring that challenging problem or issue or whatever is gnawing at you to the table. And now you have the benefit of 11 seasoned other executives who are pouring into that as well, to being able to, offer, drawing out good, bringing good questions that really draw out some more of the behind the scenes things that you might not have even considered, and then be able to pour back with some recommendations and thoughts or just words of encouragement, relative to whatever that issue is. And then
effectively have an advisory board of people that really don't have a dog in the fight other than trying to help each other out.
Exactly right. And, and again, life happens and we're all go through different challenges, and every once in a while, something will happen that'll really cause us to, a break from the agenda even and focus on that particular individual or person in maybe a deeper way than what we had intended. But we just follow the Spirit, however he's leading there, and move in that direction if that's what's appropriate. And but I will tell you that my own personal experience, I would come home from a meeting and my wife would say, and I hadn't told her what I was doing that day, and she'd say, "You had a C12 meeting today, didn't you?" And I said, "Well, yeah, I did. How did you know?" And she said, "You're always a better husband when you come back from those." And I thought, well, what does that mean for the rest of the time? But
hopefully the same experience for the other folks in the group as well. I'm sure it is. Well, so there is a right size component here for C12 in terms of there's a little bit of sophistication in just the total head count of folks that you're employed. But for listeners who are running a micro business where they maybe have less than 10 employees, or for business owners that are in between, being a good fit for C12, or being a micro business, there are other resources, and I would encourage listeners to reach out to us at the Be Bold for Jesus podcast, and we can try and help you, depending on where you're located, get connected with other believers that are also wrestling through these same challenges of not leaving our faith at church or at home, but we bring it with us into the marketplace and into our businesses, and how to how to more completely integrate that. So for folks that may be a good fit though, or would like to learn more about C12, Tom, what's the next step?
Best way would be to just reach out to me. My email address is tom.walther, WALTHER, at c12forums.com. Or my cell phone is 715-459-9611. Either one, would love to follow up and have a further conversation with you.
Great. Well, Tom, would you be willing to just take a moment to pray over and bless our listeners?
I'd certainly be happy to. Father, I just want to thank you for your goodness and your mercy and your love for us. Lord, I love how you integrate or give us the ability to integrate your word throughout all the facets of our life, whether it be our home, our marriage, our families, our personal finances, and also our businesses. And Lord, we recognize that you have a plan for each of us, and that includes the businesses we run as well. And we just want to turn that over to you and be faithful to your leading and direction and alignment. I just pray for all that are listening that, Lord, they would just draw near to you in even a closer way as a result of this interaction. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Well, Tom, thanks again for joining us on the Be Bold for Jesus podcast.
You're welcome. Thank you.
All right. Take care now.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for joining us. We pray that you have been empowered by today's discussion. The Be Bold for Jesus podcast is supported by listeners just like you. So be sure to subscribe and share the Be Bold for Jesus podcast. We appreciate any donations God may put on your heart in support of this podcast, our weekly He's the Solution Ministries sermons, the thousands of free Bibles that we send out annually, and the Be Bold for Jesus annual conference. God bless you, and be sure to tune in next week.